Victoria Ashford slammed her palm on the conference table so hard the water glasses shook. She pointed straight at the black man in the gray janitor uniform, kneeling on her marble floor. "Get out! You're dripping mop water on a billion-dollar presentation. This is exactly why I said no cleaning crew during executive hours." Marcus Cole said nothing. He picked up his bucket, tucked his mop under his arm, and walked toward the door. His sleeve slipped, and that's when General Harrison, a 3-star war hero who'd survived 2 combat tours, saw the tattoo on Marcus's wrist and stopped breathing. Because the last time he saw those numbers, 5 men were dying to save his life. Before we go any further, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and hit that bell, because what this janitor is about to reveal will shake this entire building to its foundation. The mop hit the floor at 4:47 a.m. Marcus Cole had been awake since 3. He'd packed his daughter's lunch, turkey sandwich, apple slices, a note that said, "You're my favorite human, Zara Bear," set it in the fridge beside her juice box, and driven 14 miles in the dark to reach Sentinel Defense Corporation before the first executive pulled into the parking garage. That was the deal. Invisible labor. Get in before the building wakes up. Get out before anyone important has to look at you. He pushed the mop in steady lines across the marble lobby, the same rhythm he'd used for almost 10 years. Left to right. Dip, ring, repeat. His body moved on autopilot, but his mind was somewhere else entirely, doing the math. Rent was due Friday. Zara's field trip permission slip needed $32 he didn't have yet. The Uber app on his phone showed surge pricing downtown starting at 6. If he finished mopping by 5:30, he could squeeze in 2 rides before his shift at the warehouse loading dock. 3 jobs, 7 days a week. 1 daughter who still thought her daddy was a superhero. He couldn't afford to let her down. Marcus wrung the mop and moved toward the executive conference room on the 42nd floor. The elevator hummed quietly. He caught his reflection in the polished steel doors. Gray uniform. Name badge clipped crooked. Bags under his eyes, deep enough to hold secrets. He was 42 years old, and some mornings he felt 80. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Patterson, his neighbor who watched Zara before school. "She's up early again. Had that dream about Denise. She's okay, but she's asking for you." Marcus closed his eyes. Denise. 3 years gone, and their little girl still dreamed about her mama every week. Still reached for the empty side of the bed. Still set a place at the dinner table for 3, even though only 2 people sat down. He typed back, "Tell her daddy loves her. I'll be home by 4. He wouldn't be home by 4. He was never home by 4. But the lie kept Zara from worrying, and keeping his daughter from worrying was the only mission he had left. The elevator opened. The 42nd floor spread out like a cathedral of glass and steel. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A conference table that cost more than Marcus earned in 5 years. And on the wall, a massive portrait of Colonel Richard Ashford, founder of Sentinel Defense, in full military dress. Marcus paused in front of the portrait. He always paused. Not because he admired the painting, because he knew the man. He knew how Richard Ashford took his coffee. Black, 2 sugars. Always in a tin cup, even when porcelain was available. He knew that Richard Ashford sang "Lean on Me" under his breath when he was nervous before a mission. He knew that Richard Ashford carried a crayon drawing inside his helmet and touched it every night before sleep like a prayer. He knew these things because 12 years ago, Marcus Cole had carried Richard Ashford's bleeding body out of a burning building on his back, while 5 of his brothers died around him. But nobody in this building knew that, and Marcus intended to keep it that way. He started wiping the conference table. The Pentagon delegation was arriving at 9. General Harrison and his team, here to evaluate Sentinel's new firewall system. A $2.3 billion contract hanging in the balance. Every surface had to be spotless, every glass polished, every chair aligned to the millimeter. Marcus worked quickly and quietly. He'd learned a long time ago that the best way to survive in a place like this was to be furniture. Don't speak. Don't look up. Don't exist. At 6:15 a.m., the stairwell door banged open. Victoria Ashford walked in like she owned the oxygen in the room. Which, in a sense, she did. 34 years old, Harvard MBA, Forbes 30 Under 30 alumna, and sole heir to the Sentinel defense empire after her father's death 6 years ago. She wore a black suit that cost $4,000 and heels that clicked like a metronome counting down to someone's bad day. She was on the phone, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I don't care what the engineers say. The firewall demo runs at 9. If it glitches, fire someone. I didn't build this company to apologize to generals." She hadn't built this company at all. Her father had. But Marcus kept that thought behind his teeth where it belonged. Victoria ended the call and scanned the room. Her eyes landed on Marcus like he was a stain she hadn't scheduled. "Why are you still here?" Marcus didn't look up. "Almost finished, ma'am." "Almost isn't finished. The Joint Chiefs Liaison arrives in less than 3 hours, and my conference room smells like pine sol and—" She waved her hand at him. "Whatever that is." Marcus said nothing. He moved faster, wiping the last section of the table. "And what is that?" Victoria pointed at his notebook. A small, battered composition book, sitting on the chair where he'd set it while cleaning. "My notebook, ma'am. Personal." Victoria picked it up before he could reach it. She flipped it open, her eyebrows rising. Page after page of diagrams, technical schematics, algorithmic sequences, emergency response protocols, thermal cascade calculations, handwritten in precise military-style block lettering. She laughed. Not a warm laugh, the kind of laugh that has teeth. "What is this? You moonlighting as a rocket scientist between mopping sessions?" "Just personal notes, ma'am. If I could have it back." Personal notes. Victoria held the notebook up so her assistant, who had just walked in, could see it. "Kevin, look at this. Our janitor is designing fire suppression systems in his spare time." She flipped another page. "Oh, and here's what looks like military tactical planning. Are you planning an invasion of the supply closet?" Kevin laughed on cue. He was paid well enough to laugh at anything. Marcus kept his voice level. "Ma'am, I'd appreciate it if you'd return my property." Victoria tossed the notebook onto the wet table. The pages immediately absorbed moisture, bleeding the ink on 3 weeks of carefully written notes. "There, returned. Now finish up and get out. And Marcus?" She said his name the way people say a word they find mildly disgusting. "Use the service elevator. The generals don't need to see the cleaning crew on their way in. It sends the wrong message." "Yes, ma'am." She walked toward the window, already on another call. Marcus picked up his notebook, carefully blotted the wet pages with his sleeve, and placed it inside his uniform pocket, close to his chest. Kevin, the assistant, lingered. He was 26 and had the particular cruelty of young men who confuse proximity to power with power itself. "Hey Marcus, serious question. You ever think about going back to school? I mean, I've seen your supply closet. Alphabetized cleaning products. That's almost organizational skill." He grinned. "Maybe you could work your way up to head janitor someday." "I'll keep that in mind," Marcus said. "I'm just saying, man, no offense, but you're, what, 40-something? Single dad? Working 3 jobs? At some point you gotta ask yourself if you missed a turn somewhere, right? Like, life gave you a GPS and you just didn't use it?" Marcus looked at Kevin for the first time. Really looked at him. The kid had soft hands that had never held anything heavier than a latte. He had teeth straightened by orthodontists and confidence manufactured by a trust fund. He had never been hungry, never been shot at, never held a friend's hand while they bled out in the dirt. Marcus could have said any of that. Instead, he said, "You're right, I probably missed a turn." He picked up his bucket and headed for the door. "Oh, and Marcus?" Victoria called out without turning from the window. "Tell your supervisor I want a different crew for the afternoon setup. Someone who works faster and doesn't leave personal items on my furniture." "Yes, ma'am." The door closed behind him. In the hallway, Marcus leaned against the wall and let out a breath he'd been holding since she walked in. He pulled up his left sleeve and looked at the tattoo on his inner forearm. S7-Fire-0926. 6 small stars circled the numbers. 5 were empty outlines. 1 was filled in solid black. 5 men dead, 1 survivor. He traced the filled star with his thumb. "I'm still here, brothers," he whispered. "I'm still keeping the promise." His phone buzzed again. "Mrs. Patterson. Zara wants to know if you'll be at her school presentation today. She's reading her essay about heroes." Marcus closed his eyes. The presentation was at 2 p.m. His warehouse shift started at 1. He couldn't be in both places. He'd already missed her science fair in October. Her birthday party had been just him and her eating grocery store cake on the kitchen floor because he'd been too exhausted to decorate. He typed, "I'll try my best." He wouldn't make it. They both knew that. But Zara would stand at the front of her classroom and read her essay about heroes. And when her teacher asked who her hero was, she'd say her daddy. Because Marcus Cole had taught his daughter that heroism wasn't about what the world saw. It was about what you did when nobody was looking. And right now, nobody was looking at Marcus Cole at all. The morning got worse. At 7:30, Marcus was restocking soap dispensers in the executive washroom when 2 of Sentinel's senior engineers walked in, not noticing him, or not caring. "You see the firewall diagnostic this morning?" the first one said. "Red flags everywhere. The thermal cascade algorithm keeps rejecting the new code. Because we stripped out the original architecture. The legacy code was military grade. Whoever wrote it was a genius, honestly. But Victoria wanted it modernized. So we gutted it, and now the system doesn't recognize its own protocols. If it crashes during the Pentagon demo, we're done. That's a $2 billion contract walking out the door. So what do we do? Pray?" They laughed nervously and walked out. Neither had noticed Marcus standing 3 feet away, holding a bottle of hand soap, his jaw tight. The legacy code. His code. Written in a field hospital in Kandahar while surgeons picked shrapnel out of his spine. Written because he'd made a promise to a dying friend that fire would never take another father from his daughter. Written in blood and morphine and grief, and sold out from under him for $12,000 when he was too broken to fight back. Marcus knew exactly why the firewall system was failing. He'd known for months. Every time Sentinel's engineers modernized his original code, they stripped out the safety redundancies he'd built in, the ones that prevented thermal overload, the ones that ensured the system prioritized human life over cost efficiency. They were making the system cheaper. They were also making it dangerous. He'd filed anonymous safety reports, 11 of them in the past year alone. Detailed, technically precise documents sent to federal regulators outlining every corner Sentinel had cut. Not because he wanted revenge. Because somewhere out there, a firefighter was going to walk into a building trusting a fire suppression system that Marcus Cole had designed to save lives, and Sentinel Defense had redesigned to save money. He couldn't let that happen. Not again. Not after what fire had already taken. At 8:45, Marcus was finishing the lobby floors when he saw them. 3 black SUVs pulling into the underground garage. The Pentagon delegation. General Harrison, a 3-star general with a silver star and 2 Purple Hearts, stepped out first. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, ramrod straight, with the kind of face that looked carved from the same stone as Mount Rushmore. Marcus watched from behind the lobby desk. He recognized the general immediately. He'd known Harrison as a colonel, back when they both had younger faces and the desert sand got into everything. Harrison didn't see Marcus. Why would he? Marcus was wearing a janitor's uniform, standing behind a mop, in the shadow of a building that bore another man's name. Invisible. Just the way it needed to be. The delegation took the main elevator to 42. Marcus took the service elevator, as instructed, to continue his work. He had been told to remain in the conference room during the presentation to handle any spills, adjust the thermostat, and generally exist as background furniture. He parked his cleaning cart in the corner and stood still. The conference room filled with power. Generals in dress uniforms, Sentinel executives in tailored suits, congressional liaisons with American flag pins on their lapels, and at the head of the table, Victoria Ashford, commanding the room like a general herself. Gentlemen, welcome to Sentinel Defense Corporation. Today, you'll see the future of fire safety technology, the Firewall Automated Suppression System. This system will protect military installations, government buildings, and critical infrastructure with a speed and precision that human responders simply cannot match. She clicked a remote. The screen lit up with Sentinel's logo and a sleek animation of the firewall system in action. The firewall system uses proprietary algorithms to detect, contain, and extinguish fires within 90 seconds of ignition. It's faster than any existing technology by a factor of 3. And it's 100% Sentinel-designed, Sentinel-built, and Sentinel-owned. Marcus shifted his weight slightly. 100% Sentinel-designed. That was a lie so big it needed its own zip code. General Harrison leaned forward. Impressive claims, Ms. Ashford. What's the failure rate in field conditions? Less than 0.1%, General. Another lie. Marcus had seen the internal testing reports. The failure rate was closer to 4% after the engineering team removed his safety protocols. 4% didn't sound like much until you realized it meant 4 out of every 100 fires the system would fail. 4 out of 100 buildings. 4 out of 100 families. 4% of forever was a lot of funerals. Victoria continued her presentation, confident and polished. She walked through technical specifications that Marcus recognized as his own work, repackaged with new fonts and Sentinel branding. She described algorithms he'd written in a hospital bed as cutting-edge innovations developed by our world-class engineering team. Marcus kept his eyes on the floor. He gripped his mop handle and breathed. Then, at 9:22 a.m., the screen flickered. Red text replaced the polished animation. Protocol conflict. Ember sequence unrecognized. Victoria's smile froze. Her lead engineer lunged for the laptop, typing furiously. The screen flickered again. More red text. Thermal cascade failure. System owner required. What's happening? General Harrison asked, his voice sharp. A minor calibration issue, Victoria said quickly. Kevin, get the tech team on the line. Kevin scrambled for his phone. The engineers huddled around the laptop, whispering urgently. The generals exchanged glances. A congressional liaison checked his watch. $2.3 billion was evaporating in real time. Marcus watched from the corner. He could see the problem clearly. The same problem he'd identified 6 months ago in his anonymous reports. The modernized code had stripped out the Ember sequence handshake protocol, which meant the thermal cascade algorithm had no reference point. The system was essentially trying to speak a language whose dictionary had been deleted. He could fix it in 45 seconds. He'd written the original code. He knew every line, every function, every failsafe. He also knew what would happen if he opened his mouth. The silence stretched. Victoria's face was turning red. General Harrison tapped his fingers on the table, a sound like a countdown. Marcus gripped the mop handle tighter. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket, quietly. He glanced down. A photo from Mrs. Patterson. Zara at the kitchen table, holding up her essay, smiling wide. The title visible in crayon letters at the top. My Hero, by Zara Cole. Marcus looked at the photo. He looked at the frozen screen. He looked at the room full of powerful people who couldn't solve a problem he'd already solved a decade ago. And before his brain could stop his mouth, the words came out. Quiet, calm, and precise. It's the thermal cascade loop. The Ember sequence needs a manual reset at node 3. The handshake protocol was removed in your last update. Restore it, and the system will reinitialize. Every head in the room turned toward the janitor standing in the corner with a mop. Victoria spoke first, her voice like ice cracking. Every instinct told him to shut up, apologize, and disappear. That was the protocol. Stay invisible. Keep the promise from the shadows. But Zara's photo was still glowing on his phone. My hero. The Ember sequence, Marcus said, his voice steady now. It's a handshake protocol that synchronizes the thermal detection array with the suppression delivery system. Without it, the cascade algorithm has no reference frame. It's like trying to have a conversation when one person is speaking English and the other is speaking Mandarin. You need a translator. The Ember sequence is that translator. The room was absolutely still. Your engineering team removed it during the last code update, probably because it added 0.3 seconds to the response time, and someone decided speed was more important than stability. But without the handshake, the system will fail under high thermal conditions. Every time. Guaranteed. Victoria stared at him. How could you possibly restore the Ember sequence at node 3, Marcus said. The system will reinitialize in about 45 seconds. And while your team is at it, they should check the thermal sealing parameters. They're set for standard building fires, but the military specs require tolerance up to 1800 degrees. Your current settings max out at 1200. General Harrison leaned back in his chair. His face had gone very still. He was staring at Marcus's left arm, because when Marcus had gestured toward the screen, his sleeve had ridden up. And there, on the inside of his forearm, faded but unmistakable, was the tattoo. S7-Fire-09 826. 6 stars. 5 empty. 1 filled. General Harrison's hand gripped the edge of the table so hard, his knuckles turned white. He knew those numbers. He knew what they meant. He knew because 12 years ago, he'd been pinned under a burning steel beam in a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan, and the last thing he'd seen before losing consciousness was a young black captain, face covered in blood, uniform on fire, pulling him free with one arm while firing a weapon with the other, screaming at his team to keep moving, don't stop, don't you dare stop. 5 of those men never stopped. They kept moving until the fire took them. And the one who survived? The one who carried Harrison out on his back through 200 meters of hell, had a tattoo on his forearm that matched exactly what the general was looking at right now. General Harrison's lips moved silently. His eyes were locked on Marcus's wrist. Marcus saw the recognition. Their eyes met for one fraction of a second. 2 men connected by fire and blood, and a night that the Pentagon had classified so deeply it might as well have never happened. Marcus pulled his sleeve down, picked up his mop, and looked away. "Miss Ashford," he said quietly, "I apologize for the interruption. I'll get out of your way." He walked toward the door. Victoria's voice followed him, sharp and public and cruel. "You're right. You will get out of my way. And don't come back. Consider yourself terminated. I'll have security collect your badge." Marcus paused at the door. He didn't turn around. "Yes, ma'am." General Harrison sat frozen in his chair, watching the man in the gray uniform walk out of the conference room, with the quiet dignity of someone who had survived things that would break every other person in this room. The general's hands were trembling, because the janitor who just got fired, the black single dad who'd been mocked and humiliated in front of generals and executives and congressional liaisons, was Captain Marcus Cole. Shadow 7, sole survivor. The man who wrote the code they were all arguing about. The man who'd saved General Harrison's life, and the man who'd carried Victoria Ashford's dying father out of a fire on his back. The door clicked shut behind Marcus, and the hallway swallowed him whole. He stood there for 3 seconds, maybe 4. His hand still gripped the mop handle, knuckles tight, veins pressing against the skin where the tattoo lived. He could hear Victoria's muffled voice through the glass, already moving on, already forgetting he existed. That was fine. He'd been forgotten before. Forgetting was easy. What was hard was remembering. And Marcus Cole remembered everything. He walked to the service elevator, pressed the button, and waited. His phone buzzed. Another text from Mrs. Patterson. "Zara practiced her essay 3 times this morning. She's wearing the dress Denise bought her last Easter. She says she wants to look nice for you." Marcus stared at the screen until it blurred. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside, leaned against the back wall, and let his head fall. The fluorescent light hummed above him, cold and indifferent. He caught his reflection in the steel. A tired man in a gray uniform, holding a mop, riding a service elevator alone. Captain Marcus Cole. Shadow 7. Silver Star recipient. The man who wrote the algorithm that was worth $2.3 billion on the screen upstairs. Terminated by a woman who didn't know his name until she needed someone to yell at. The elevator reached the basement. Marcus rolled his cart into the supply room and sat down on an overturned bucket. He pulled out his notebook, the pages still damp from where Victoria had thrown it onto the wet table, and carefully separated each sheet, laying them flat to dry. 3 weeks of notes, thermal variance calculations, safety protocol modifications, detailed records of every shortcut Sentinel's engineering team had taken in the last 6 months. Evidence that the firewall system, as currently configured, could fail catastrophically in exactly the kind of high-temperature military scenario it was designed for. He'd been compiling this for the next anonymous report to the Federal Safety Board. Now his notes were bleeding ink and smelled like pine sol. Marcus laughed quietly, not because it was funny, because the alternative was something else entirely, and he couldn't afford that. Not today. Zara needed him steady. His phone rang, an actual call this time. He looked at the number, and his stomach dropped. "Mr. Cole, this is Principal Hendricks at Westfield Elementary." "Yes, ma'am." "I'm calling because Zara's teacher, Mrs. Whitman, wanted to let you know there was a small incident this morning. Nothing serious, but a few students were teasing Zara about her essay topic. She chose to write about you, and some of the children made comments about your profession." Marcus closed his eyes. What kind of comments? One boy told her that janitors aren't heroes. Zara got upset and told him her daddy was braver than anyone's daddy. The teacher handled it, and Zara's fine now. She's actually quite determined to read her essay at the presentation. But I wanted you to know. Thank you, Principal Hendricks. Mr. Cole, will you be attending this afternoon? Zara's been telling everyone her father will be there. Marcus looked at his watch. 9:38 a.m. The warehouse shift started at 1. He'd just been fired from Sentinel, which meant no more morning income. The Uber app showed decent surge pricing if he started driving by 10. He needed that money. The rent check was already written and sitting on the kitchen counter, waiting to be mailed. "I'll be there," he said. He hung up and pressed his palms against his face. 3 jobs, and now he was down to 2. His checking account had $412. Rent was $1,100. Zara's after-school program was $250. He remembered the beam pinning his left leg, the weight of it crushing bone. He remembered screaming into his radio and hearing nothing but static. He remembered accepting, with the calm clarity that comes at the end, that he was going to die in that building. And then a voice, young, steady, terrified but moving anyway. "General, we're getting you out. Don't move. That's an order." An enlisted captain giving a general an order. In any other circumstance, it would have been insubordination. In that moment, it was salvation. Marcus Cole had come through a wall of fire with 2 of his men. They lifted the beam. Marcus grabbed Harrison and threw him over his shoulder like a sack of grain. The kid was strong, farm strong, the kind of muscle you get from actual labor, not a gym membership. They ran. Behind them, the building screamed as it collapsed. Harrison heard gunfire, enemy combatants using the fire as cover. He heard Marcus yelling at his team. Then he heard explosions. Then he heard nothing. He woke up in a field hospital in Bagram, with second-degree burns on his legs, and a doctor telling him he was alive, because a 6-man unit had gone in against direct orders to pull him out. 5 of those men were dead. The 6th, the captain who carried him, was in surgery 3 tenths over, with shrapnel in his spine and burns covering most of his body. Harrison had tried to visit Marcus in the hospital. He was told the patient had been transferred, classified. Shadow 7's mission was buried so deep that even Harrison, a 2-star at the time, couldn't access the files. The official record said the fire was an accident. The official record said no rescue was attempted. The official record said Captain Marcus Cole was presumed dead. And now, 12 years later, that dead man was standing in a Billionaire's conference room with a mop, getting screamed at by the daughter of the officer he'd died to save.
"General Harrison? General?"
Victoria's voice snapped him back. The room was looking at him. "I apologize," Harrison said. "Could you repeat the question?" "I asked if the Pentagon has any concerns about the timeline. We can have the first units deployed within 18 months. Harrison looked at the screen. The firewall system had been rebooted by the engineering team, using exactly the fix Marcus had described. Reset the Ember sequence at Node 3. They hadn't credited him, of course. The lead engineer announced he'd found a minor calibration error and resolved it. The system was running now, green lights across the board, because the janitor they'd just fired had given them the answer. "General?" Victoria pressed. "Ms. Ashford, I have a question about the system architecture." "Of course." "Who wrote the original code?" Victoria didn't hesitate. "Our in-house engineering team. Sentinel's R&D department developed the firewall algorithm from the ground up. All patents are fully owned by Sentinel Defense Corporation." "From the ground up," Harrison repeated. "That's correct." Harrison nodded slowly. He pulled a pen from his jacket and wrote 2 words on his notepad, then slid it across the table to his aide. The aide read it, looked up sharply, and left the room without a word. Victoria noticed, but didn't comment. She was too busy being impressive. "The thermal cascade algorithm alone represents 4 years of development and over $70 million in R&D investment," she continued. "No other company on Earth has this technology." Harrison thought about Marcus Cole writing that algorithm in a hospital bed, hooked to a morphine drip, with burns on 60% of his body, and a promise burning hotter than any of his wounds. $70 million. They'd bought it for $12,000. "Impressive," Harrison said, and the word tasted like ash. The presentation continued for another 40 minutes. Victoria was polished, confident, commanding. She had her father's charisma. Harrison could see that. The same jawline. The same way of holding a room's attention. But where Richard Ashford had led with warmth and conviction, his daughter led with force and intimidation. Richard would have hated this. Richard would have hated all of this. At 10:30, Victoria called for a break. Coffee was served by another member of the cleaning staff, a young woman who kept her eyes down and moved quickly, clearly trained by the same invisible protocol Marcus had mastered. Harrison stood and approached the window. His aide returned and whispered in his ear. The general's face didn't change, but his hand tightened around his coffee cup. "You're sure?" Harrison murmured. "Confirmed, sir. Pentagon records match. Shadow 7, Operation Emberfall, September 26th, 2012. Captain Marcus Cole, sole survivor. Listed as presumed dead for 3 years. Medically discharged in 2015 with a spinal injury and extensive burn scarring. No pension, no disability, no recognition." "Why no pension?" "He refused it, sir. Said he didn't earn it. Said the pension belonged to the families of the 5 men who died." Harrison set down his coffee cup very carefully, as if it might break if he gripped it any harder. "And the original firewall code?" Written by Captain Cole during his recovery at Walter Reed. Submitted to the Department of Defense as an open-source safety protocol. His commanding officer's widow, a Mrs. Eleanor Ashford, acquired the patents through a military surplus auction in 2014. Purchase price, $12,000. Eleanor Ashford, Victoria Ashford's mother, sir. She folded the patents into Sentinel Defense before her death in 2016. Harrison looked across the room at Victoria, who was laughing with her CFO about something undoubtedly profitable.
That woman's company is built on a dead man's promise, Harrison said quietly.
Not dead, sir. He was mopping the floor 20 minutes ago. Harrison turned back to the window. Below, in the parking garage, he could see a figure in gray loading cleaning supplies into the back of a rusted pickup truck. Moving slowly, favoring his left side, the side where the shrapnel still lived in his spine. Marcus Cole, 42 years old, 3 jobs, 1 daughter, 0 recognition for the code that was about to make Victoria Ashford a billionaire 10 times over. Sir, the aide said, what do you want to do? Harrison watched Marcus close the truck bed, lean against it for a moment. Just a moment, the way a man does when his body hurts and nobody's watching, and then climb into the driver's seat. Nothing yet, Harrison said. Not yet. He returned to the table as the break ended.
Victoria picked up where she'd left off, now walking the delegation through Sentinel's 5-year growth projections. Numbers, graphs, market share, all built on technology stolen from a man who'd been mopping her floors without complaint. At 10:47, something happened that changed the trajectory of the meeting. Victoria's lead engineer, a man named Bradley with a Stanford degree and a permanent look of mild panic, approached her during the presentation and whispered something. Victoria's expression tightened. "Excuse me for one moment, gentlemen." She stepped to the side, and Bradley spoke rapidly. Harrison couldn't hear the words, but he could read Victoria's face. First irritation, then concern, then something approaching fear. She returned to the podium with a manufactured smile. "Minor technical update. Our team has discovered that some of the firewall's baseline protocols may need recalibration before field deployment. Nothing that affects the timeline."
What kind of recalibration? Harrison asked.
"The thermal sealing parameters. Our system is currently optimized for standard structural fires, but the military specifications require higher tolerance thresholds." Harrison leaned forward. "How much higher?" Victoria glanced at Bradley, who held up a tablet showing numbers that made his hands shake slightly. "The military spec requires tolerance to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. Our current system is calibrated to 1200. That's a 600-degree gap, Ms. Ashford, which our team can address in the next development cycle. And what happens if a fire exceeds 1200 degrees before your next development cycle?" Silence. "The system would..." Victoria paused. "It would require manual override." Manual override? In a building that's burning at 1800 degrees? You're suggesting that a human being would need to physically intervene in a fire that can melt steel. More silence. Harrison leaned back. "Interesting, because about 20 minutes ago, the man you fired, the janitor, mentioned exactly this problem. 1800 degrees. He knew your system's limits before your own engineers did." Victoria's jaw tightened. "With respect, General, a janitor overhearing technical jargon and repeating it doesn't constitute expertise." "Overhearing," Harrison repeated. "Is that what you think happened?" "I think a cleaning staff member made inappropriate comments during a classified presentation, and I handled it accordingly." Harrison studied her for a long moment. The room was quiet. The other generals watched with the careful attention of men who'd learned to read battlefields. "Ms. Ashford, let me tell you something about expertise. I've spent 40 years in the military. I've commanded troops in 3 wars. And in all that time, I've learned one thing that matters more than anything else.
Victoria waited. The most dangerous mistake a leader can make is assuming that rank determines knowledge. I've seen privates save missions that generals botched. I've seen medics make tactical decisions that turned entire engagements. And I've seen... His voice caught slightly. I've seen men in the lowest positions perform acts of courage that people in corner offices couldn't imagine.
That's very inspirational, General, but I fail to see...
I'm not finished. Victoria closed her mouth. Your janitor didn't overhear technical jargon. He diagnosed a system failure in real time, identified the root cause, specified the exact node that needed reset, and flagged a critical parameter gap that your entire engineering team missed. That's not eavesdropping. That's mastery.
General Harrison, I appreciate your perspective, but the man cleans floors for a living. I've seen his file. No college degree. No technical certifications.
No. Have you seen his military file? The question hung in the air like smoke. Victoria blinked. His military file? He's a janitor. Have you seen it? Why would I look at a janitor's military record? Harrison nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. That's exactly the problem, Miss Ashford. You never looked. He stood up from the table. Gentlemen, I'd like to request a 30-minute recess. I need to make a phone call. The delegation murmured agreement. Victoria stood rigid at the podium, her composure cracking for the first time.
General, is there a problem with the presentation?
Harrison picked up his cap and tucked it under his arm. The presentation is fine, Miss Ashford. It's what's missing from it that concerns me. He walked out of the conference room, leaving Victoria standing alone under the portrait of her father. The father who came home because of a man she'd just called nobody. In the hallway, Harrison pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It rang 3 times. Pentagon Archives, Classified Division. This is General Thomas Harrison. Authorization code Tango Hotel 779. I need the full unredacted file on Operation Emberfall. Shadow 7, September 26, 2012. Sir, that file is classified at level... I know what level it's classified at. I was in the building when it burned. Pull the file. A pause. Then, yes, sir. Hold, please. Harrison stood in the hallway of Sentinel Defense Corporation, looking at the polished marble, the glass walls, the corporate art that cost more than Marcus Cole earned in a decade. Somewhere in this building, a maintenance supervisor was probably already reassigning Marcus's shift, handing his mop to someone else, erasing the last trace of the most decorated soldier who'd ever cleaned these floors. The archive clerk came back on the line. Sir, I have the file. What do you need? Everything, Harrison said. Start with the casualty list and the survivor report. And then I need the original patent filing for something called the Ember sequence. The Ember sequence, sir? It's a fire suppression algorithm, written by a captain named Marcus Cole. I need to know exactly how it ended up in the hands of a private defense contractor. That may take a few minutes, sir. I've got time, Harrison said. The man who wrote it has been waiting 12 years. A few more minutes won't kill us. He hung up and looked through the glass wall at Victoria, who was arguing with Bradley about the thermal parameters, her face flushed, her voice carrying the sharp edge of someone who was used to being right and was discovering, slowly, that she might not be. Harrison thought about Marcus Cole driving away in that rusted truck, heading to another job that would pay him just enough to not quite make it through the month. A man with shrapnel in his spine, driving for Uber. A war hero stocking warehouse shelves. A father who'd given up everything, his patents, his pension, his identity, to keep a promise to a dead man. And the dead man's daughter had just fired him for knowing too much. Harrison straightened his jacket. He walked back toward the conference room. Whatever happened next, he wasn't leaving this building until Victoria Ashford knew exactly who she'd thrown away.
Harrison walked back into the conference room at exactly 11:14 a.m. His face revealed nothing. 40 years of military discipline had taught him how to carry a grenade behind a calm expression, and right now he was holding several. Victoria was mid-sentence, explaining deployment logistics to the congressional liaisons, when she noticed him. "Welcome back, General. We were just covering the installation timeline for Phase 2.
"I'm sure it's thorough," Harrison said.
He sat down, placed his phone face down on the table, and folded his hands. "Please continue." She continued, but Harrison wasn't listening to the words. He was watching Victoria the way he'd once watched enemy positions through binoculars, noting every movement, cataloging every tell. The way she touched her collar when she exaggerated. The way her eyes flicked to Bradley whenever she cited a technical specification she didn't fully understand. The way she said, "our technology," and "our innovation," with the easy confidence of someone who'd never questioned where any of it actually came from. Richard, Harrison thought. Your girl inherited your voice, but not your conscience. At 11:32, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen under the table. A secure file from Pentagon archives. He opened it, scanned the first page, and his jaw tightened so hard he felt his molars grind. The full, unredacted file on Operation Emberfall. Casualty Report. Staff Sergeant Darnell Price, 29. Sergeant First Class Michael Torres, 31. Corporal James Jimmy Okafor, 24. Staff Sergeant William Chen, 27. Sergeant Angela Reeves, 26. All killed in action. All volunteers. All members of Shadow 7 who went into that building knowing they probably wouldn't come out. Survivor. Captain Marcus Cole, 30. Injuries. Shrapnel fragmentation to T7 to T9 vertebrae. Second and third degree burns covering approximately 60% of the body. Smoke inhalation damage to both lungs. Traumatic brain injury from blast concussion. Hospitalized for 18 months. 7 surgeries. Medically discharged with full disability rating. Disability payments accepted. 0. Harrison read that line twice. 0. Marcus had qualified for full military disability. Nearly $4,000 a month for life. He'd turned it down. The file included a handwritten note from Marcus to the VA office, and Harrison had to read it 3 times because his vision kept blurring. This money belongs to the families of the 5 soldiers who didn't walk out. I'm alive. They're not. Please redirect my benefits to the Survivors Fund for Darnell Price, Michael Torres, James Okafor, William Chen, and Angela Reeves. They earned it. I just got lucky. Harrison closed his eyes. Lucky. The man had shrapnel in his spine and burns on 60% of his body, and he called himself lucky. The next document in the file was the patent record. The Ember sequence, the core algorithm that powered the firewall system, had been written by Captain Marcus Cole during his recovery at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. He'd submitted it to the Department of Defense as a public safety protocol, explicitly requesting that it be made freely available to any agency that could use it to save lives. No patent, no ownership claim, no profit. But the DoD had classified the technology and filed it under military intellectual property. When budget cuts hit in 2014, the patent was included in a surplus auction, a quiet, invite-only sale of excess military assets that most people never knew existed. Eleanor Ashford, Victoria's mother and the widow of Colonel Richard Ashford, had purchased the patent for $12,000. She'd folded it into Sentinel Defense, hired an engineering team to commercialize it, and never once mentioned where it came from. Whether Eleanor knew whose work she'd bought,
The file didn't say. But the math was simple enough. A dying soldier's promise, written in pain, designed to save lives, bought for less than the cost of Victoria's shoes. Harrison closed the file. His hands were steady, but something behind his ribs was burning with a heat that had nothing to do with temperature. The presentation reached the Q&A portion. The congressional liaison, a sharp-eyed woman named Senator Douglas, asked about the system's origin.
Ms. Ashford, can you walk us through the development history of the core algorithm? Specifically, was any of this technology derived from military research? Victoria smiled, the smile of someone who'd rehearsed this answer. The firewall system is 100% proprietary, Senator, developed entirely by Sentinel's R&D division. While we've certainly drawn inspiration from military safety standards, the core technology is original. Harrison's pen snapped in his hand. He looked down at the broken pieces, set them on the table, and said nothing. "Impressive," Senator Douglas said, though her tone suggested she'd heard corporate claims before and knew what they were worth. "And the patent history is clean?" "Spotless," Victoria said. "Our legal team conducted a full audit. There are no competing claims, no licensing disputes, and no prior art that overlaps with our proprietary systems." Harrison pushed his chair back. The scrape of it against the marble cut through Victoria's polished assurances like a blade. "General," Victoria said, "did you have a question?" "Several." Harrison stood up slowly, the way a man stands when he's made a decision he can't take back. "But let me start with one. Ms. Ashford, do you know what Operation Emberfall was?" Victoria's smile flickered. "I'm not familiar with that name." "It was a classified military rescue operation. September 26, 2012. Helmand Province, Afghanistan. A forward operating base caught fire during an enemy engagement. 14 military personnel were trapped. Standard extraction was ruled too dangerous. The fire exceeded 1,800 degrees, and enemy forces were using the chaos as cover." Victoria's expression was polite but impatient. "General, I'm not sure how this relates to—" A 6-person Special Operations Unit went in against direct orders. They were called Shadow 7, Ghost Unit. No official record, no recognition, no safety net. Harrison's voice was quiet, but it filled every corner of the room. They fought through enemy fire, entered a building that was literally melting, and extracted all 14 personnel. The room was very still. 5 of the 6 died, burned alive, shot, crushed under collapsing structures. They knew the odds going in, and they went anyway. Harrison paused. The mission commander, the one who carried the wounded out on his back, the one who survived, was a 29-year-old captain from Macon, Georgia, a black kid from a family that couldn't afford to send him to college, so he enlisted and worked his way up through talent and grit and a stubborn refusal to leave anyone behind. Victoria shifted her weight. "General, this is clearly a meaningful story, but we have a schedule." The officer he carried out of that fire, the one he saved, was me. The room went rigid. "You saved—" Victoria blinked. "I'm sorry, you're saying someone on this Shadow 7 team saved your life?" "Not just mine." Harrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph, printed 20 minutes ago from the classified file. 6 soldiers in combat gear, faces smeared with dust and sweat, standing in front of a concrete barricade. Young, strong, alive. 14 lives saved that night. But the one that matters to you, Ms. Ashford, the one that should matter to you, is the commanding officer of the base, the man who was trapped on the 2nd floor when the roof collapsed. Harrison set the photograph on the table and slid it toward Victoria. "Colonel Richard Ashford, your father." The blood drained from Victoria's face, not slowly, all at once, like someone had pulled a plug. That can't be right.
My father was injured in a base accident. There was a fire, but it was an equipment malfunction. He told me.
He told you what the Pentagon told him to tell you. Operation Emberfall was classified at the highest level. Your father wasn't allowed to discuss it. The rescue never officially happened. The men who died never officially existed. Victoria picked up the photograph with fingers that had lost all their steadiness. She looked at the 6 faces, young men and 1 young woman, all smiling, all unaware that within 24 hours, 5 of them would be dead.
"I don't understand," she whispered. "Which one?"
"The tall one, second from the left. The one with his hand on your father's shoulder." Victoria stared at the face in the photograph. Younger, unburned, unbroken, but unmistakable. Marcus Cole, the janitor. "No," she said. The word came out flat, mechanical, like a system rejecting an input it couldn't process. "No, that's not possible." "I watched him carry your father through 200 meters of fire, Ms. Ashford. I watched him do it with shrapnel in his spine and his uniform burning off his body. I watched him lay your father on a stretcher and then collapse, and I watched them carry him into surgery, where he spent the next 18 months learning how to walk again." Victoria sat down. She didn't choose to sit. Her legs simply stopped working, and the chair caught her. "The tattoo on his wrist," Harrison continued, S7-Fire-0926. Shadow 7. Operation Fire. The internal designation for Ember Fall. September 26th, the date of the mission. The 6 stars represent his team. 5 empty stars for the 5 who died. 1 filled star for the 1 who survived. He paused. "The man you just fired." "Stop!" Victoria's voice cracked. "Just stop!" "I can't stop, Ms. Ashford, because there's more, and you need to hear it." Senator Douglas leaned forward. The other generals sat motionless. Bradley, the engineer, had gone white as paper. After Captain Cole was discharged, he had nothing. No pension. He gave that away to the families of his fallen team. No savings. 18 months of hospitalization took everything. No patents, because the algorithm he wrote during his recovery was supposed to be a gift to the world, a promise he made to your father. "A promise," Victoria repeated numbly. "Your father was trapped under a burning beam when Captain Cole reached him. Your father was conscious. He grabbed Cole's arm and said, and this is in the classified debrief, Ms. Ashford. These are your father's recorded words. He said, 'Promise me that fire won't take any more fathers from their daughters.' And Captain Cole promised. And then he pulled your father free with 1 arm while the ceiling collapsed around them." Victoria was crying now. Not the careful, controlled tears of a CEO managing a difficult moment. These were the tears of a daughter, hearing for the first time how her father almost didn't come home. "The Ember sequence," Harrison said, and his voice had gone very quiet. "The algorithm that powers your firewall system. Captain Cole wrote it in a hospital bed at Walter Reed. Between surgeries. Between skin grafts. Between physical therapy sessions where he had to learn to use his hands again because the burns had fused 3 of his fingers together." Harrison let that sit. The room didn't breathe. "He wrote it because of the promise he made to your father. He designed it to detect, contain, and extinguish fires before they could kill. And he submitted it to the Department of Defense with explicit instructions that it should be free, available to anyone, military, civilian, anyone who needed it. Because the promise wasn't about money. It was about making sure no more fathers died in fires that could be prevented." "Then how did we—" Victoria started, then stopped. She already knew. The answer was in her mother's files, in the foundation of the company she'd inherited.
In the billions she'd built on top of a soldier's broken body and broken promise.
Your mother bought the patent at a military surplus auction for $12,000, Harrison said. Captain Cole was still in physical rehabilitation at the time. He had no legal representation. He didn't even know the patent had been filed under military intellectual property instead of public domain. By the time he found out, Sentinel had already commercialized the technology, and his chances of fighting it in court were exactly 0. My mother wouldn't. Your mother did. Whether she knew whose work she was buying, I can't say. But the result is the same. The man who wrote the code that built your empire has been mopping your floors for the last 10 years, Ms. Ashford. And you just fired him for knowing too much about his own invention. Victoria put the photograph down on the table. Her hands were shaking so badly, the image blurred. He's been here for 10 years? Yes. In this building? Cleaning floors? Yes. And he never said anything? He never told anyone who he was? Harrison almost smiled. Almost. That's not how Marcus Cole operates. He doesn't announce himself. He doesn't demand recognition. He keeps his head down, and he does his job, and he keeps his promises, even when the people he's protecting don't know he exists. Victoria looked up at Harrison with eyes that had lost all their corporate armor. Why? Why would anyone do that? Because your father asked him to. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She pressed her hand against her mouth and turned away from the table. Harrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a second photograph, this one from Marcus's personnel file. A formal military portrait. Captain Marcus Cole in dress uniform, silver star on his chest, eyes steady and clear, and carrying a weight that no metal could account for. Your father lived 6 more years because of this man. He walked you down the aisle. He held your firstborn nephew. He saw you graduate from business school. He was there when you took over Sentinel. Every moment of your father's life after September 26th, 2012, was a gift from the man you called nobody this morning. Senator Douglas spoke for the first time since the revelation began. General Harrison, are you saying that the core technology of the firewall system, the technology Sentinel is presenting for a $2.3 billion government contract, was stolen from a disabled veteran? I'm saying it was written in blood and pain by a man who intended it to be free, and it ended up as the foundation of a corporate empire that treats its creator as invisible help. Victoria stood up suddenly. Her chair rolled back and hit the wall. I need to find him. Ms. Ashford, we're in the middle of, I need to find him right now. She grabbed her phone and dialed the front desk. This is Victoria Ashford, the janitor who was terminated this morning, Marcus Cole. Has he left the building? A pause that lasted forever. He turned in his badge and left the parking garage approximately 40 minutes ago, ma'am. His supervisor said he cleaned out his locker and left without incident. Where did he go? We don't have that information, ma'am. He's no longer a Sentinel employee. Victoria hung up. She looked at Harrison with something new in her eyes. Not the cold authority of a CEO, but the raw desperation of a daughter who just realized she'd been spitting on her father's grave. I called him nothing, she said. Her voice was barely audible. I threw his notebook on a wet table. I told him to use the service elevator so the generals wouldn't have to see him. I made him clean a coffee spill on his hands and knees while I laughed. Harrison said nothing. There was nothing to say. He saved my father's life. He wrote the technology that built my company, and I fired him for knowing more than I did. Yes, Harrison said simply. You did. Victoria pressed both hands flat on the conference table, steadying herself. Then she looked up at the portrait of her father on the wall. Colonel Richard Ashford, dressed in full military regalia, eyes warm and firm, and carrying the exact same expression that Marcus Cole wore every morning when he picked up his mop. "He's been watching over me," she said quietly. "That's why he was here. That's why he took this job. He's been keeping a promise to my father." Harrison nodded once. "And every time I insulted him, every time I treated him like dirt, every time I walked past him without looking, he just took it, because that was part of the promise." "Marcus Cole doesn't break promises, Ms. Ashford. That's the one thing you can count on." Victoria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When she looked up, the CEO was gone. The corporate mask was gone. What was left was a woman standing in the wreckage of everything she thought she knew. "General Harrison, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." "Go ahead." "My father, before the mission, did he know he might not come back?" Harrison was quiet for a long time. The room waited. "Your father called Shadow 7 into his tent the night before. He told them about his daughter back home. Told them she was going to change the world someday." Harrison's voice roughened. "He made every man in that room promise that if he didn't make it out, they'd make sure his little girl grew up in a world where heroes didn't need applause to do their jobs." Victoria's face crumpled. "He talked about me." "Every day. He carried a drawing you made in kindergarten. A little girl and her daddy, with the words, 'My hero,' written in purple crayon. Kept it in his helmet. Touched it every night, like a rosary." Victoria put her hand over her mouth. Tears ran through her fingers. "Captain Cole has that drawing," Harrison said. "Your father gave it to him before the mission. Asked him to deliver it to you when you were old enough to understand what it meant." "He's had it this whole time?" 12 years. Victoria grabbed her coat off the back of her chair. "I have to find him." "Miss Ashford," Bradley started. "Cancel the rest of the presentation. Cancel everything." She was already moving toward the door. "Senator Douglas, General Harrison, I owe every person in this room an apology, and I owe one man far more than that. But right now, I need to find Marcus Cole before he disappears again." Harrison stood. "I know where he'll be." Victoria stopped. "How?" "Because I know what kind of man he is." It's 11:50 a.m. His daughter has a school presentation at 2 o'clock. He just lost his morning job, which means he's scrambling to make up the income before the day's over. But he told his little girl he'd be there. And Marcus Cole doesn't break promises. Harrison reached for his cap. "He'll drive for Uber until 1:45, make maybe $30 or $40, then park outside Westfield Elementary and walk in wearing the same gray uniform he just got fired in. And his daughter will read an essay about why her daddy is her hero. And he'll sit in the back row and cry quietly, where nobody can see." Victoria stared at him. "That's who you fired this morning, Ms. Ashford? That's the man you called nobody." Victoria's chin trembled. She straightened her shoulders the way her father used to. Harrison recognized the gesture and walked out of the conference room without another word. The generals, the senators, the executives, and the engineers sat in a silence so deep it hummed. On the wall above them all, Colonel Richard Ashford's portrait looked out over the room with eyes that seemed, for the first time, deeply and permanently sad. Victoria made it to the parking garage before her legs gave out. She sat in the driver's seat of her Mercedes with the door still open, one heel on the concrete, the other caught on the doorframe, and she pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and sobbed. Not the quiet, dignified kind, the ugly kind. The kind that comes from a place so deep it doesn't have a name. The place where daughters keep the things they never said to their fathers, and the guilt they never knew they were carrying. Her phone rang 4 times. Kevin. Bradley. Her CFO.
her lawyer. She ignored them all. She pulled up the company directory with shaking hands and searched for Marcus Cole's employee file. Hired, March 14th, 2016. Position, janitorial staff, night/morning shift. Emergency contact, Patricia Patterson, neighbor. Home address, 2847 Elm Ridge Road, Unit B. 10 years. He'd been in her building for 10 years. She'd walked past him 1,000 times.
She'd spoken to him maybe a dozen, always to complain, always to correct, always to remind him that he was beneath the altitude where she lived. She started the car and pulled out of the garage. The GPS said 22 minutes to Elm Ridge Road. She made it in 14. The neighborhood was exactly what she'd expected, and nothing she was prepared for. Small houses with chain-link fences, cars that ran but didn't shine, a basketball hoop with a torn net, kids on bicycles, an old man watering a lawn that was more dirt than grass. She parked across the street from Unit B and sat there. The house was small, one story, faded blue paint, a front porch with a wooden swing that listed slightly to the left. A child's bicycle leaned against the railing. Pink streamers on the handlebars. Marcus's truck wasn't there. Harrison was right. He was driving, trying to make up the money he'd just lost. Victoria got out of the car. She didn't know what she was going to do. She didn't have a plan. CEOs always had plans. Victoria Ashford always had a plan. Right now she had nothing but a chest full of broken glass and a photograph of 6 soldiers burning a hole in her coat pocket. She stood on the sidewalk, staring at the house where the man who saved her father's life came home every night to a daughter who thought he was a superhero. A house that could fit inside her living room. A house that cost less than her watch. "You looking for Marcus?" Victoria turned. A woman in her 60s stood on the neighboring porch, reading glasses perched on her nose, a dish towel over her shoulder. Patricia Patterson, the emergency contact. "Yes, I work at Sentinel Defense. I need to speak with him." Mrs. Patterson studied her, the way women of a certain age study other women. Thoroughly, and without apology. "You're her, aren't you? The boss lady." "I'm sorry?" "Marcus doesn't talk much about work, but Zara tells me things. She says there's a lady at Daddy's building who yells a lot." Mrs. Patterson folded the dish towel. "I'm guessing that's you." Victoria opened her mouth, closed it, and nodded. "Mm-hmm." Mrs. Patterson came down her porch steps slowly, favoring her left hip. "He's not here. He left about an hour ago. Came home, changed his shirt, kissed Zara's picture on the mantel, and headed back out. Said he had to pick up some extra rides before Zara's school thing. He was fired this morning," Victoria said, "from my company." "I know. He called me. Asked if I could watch Zara an extra hour tonight, because he'd need to find a new morning job starting tomorrow." Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "That man. The world kicks him, and his first phone call is about his daughter's schedule." Victoria's throat tightened. "Mrs. Patterson, do you know, did he ever tell you about his military service?" "Some. Not much. I know he was hurt bad overseas. I know he lost friends. I know he has nightmares sometimes. Zara told me he talks in his sleep. Names: Darnell, Michael, Jimmy, Angela. He says their names like he's calling roll." She paused. "I know he has scars he doesn't show anyone. Burns, all down his back and arms. He wears long sleeves even in August. Zara asked him once why, and he told her the sun was too strong for his skin. She believed him because she was 6. She doesn't believe him anymore, but she stopped asking because she loves him enough to let him keep that one." Victoria wiped her face. Mascara came away on her fingers.
She didn't care. That man works 3 jobs, Mrs. Patterson continued. Janitor, Uber driver, warehouse loader. He sleeps maybe 4 hours a night. He's got metal in his spine that sets off every airport detector in the country. His hands shake in the morning. Nerve damage, I think. But by the time he picks up Zara from school, they're steady as stone because he won't let her see him hurting.
Why? Victoria asked, and the word came out cracked. Why doesn't he get help? There are programs, VA benefits, disability.
He gave all that away. Every penny. Signed it over to the families of the soldiers who died. Said they needed it more. Mrs. Patterson looked at Victoria with eyes that held no judgment and no mercy. You know what Marcus Cole's biggest expense is? After rent and food and keeping the lights on? Victoria shook her head. Flowers. Every month he sends flowers to 5 families. Darnell Price's mother in Cleveland. Michael Torres's wife in San Antonio. Jimmy Okafor's sister in Baltimore. William Chen's parents in Sacramento. Angela Reeves's husband in Tallahassee. Every month for 12 years. He never misses. He skips meals before he'd skip those flowers. Victoria sat down on Mrs. Patterson's porch step. She didn't ask permission. Her legs simply made the decision for her. "What have I done?" she whispered. "You treated a good man like he was nothing."
That's what you did. But the question isn't what you've done, honey. It's what you're going to do about it.
Victoria looked at her phone. 12:17 p.m. Zara's school presentation was at 2. "Where's Westfield Elementary?" Mrs. Patterson pointed east. 12 minutes that way. But if you're going there to make yourself feel better, don't bother. That little girl doesn't need your guilt. She needs her daddy." "I'm not going there for me," Victoria said. She stood up, straightened her coat, and looked Mrs. Patterson in the eye. "I'm going because someone needs to be in that audience who knows what Zara's father actually did. And I'm going because my father would have gone." Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "Turn right on Madison. Left on Cooper. You can't miss it." Victoria drove. Her phone rang again. Kevin. And this time she answered. "Victoria, the generals are asking questions. Senator Douglas wants a full patent audit. The legal team is panicking. Where are you?" "Cancel everything. Cancel. Victoria, we have a $2.3 billion. I said cancel it, Kevin. All of it. The presentation, the contract negotiation, the press briefing. Cancel everything until further notice. The board will. The board can wait. I'm dealing with something that matters." She hung up. Kevin would think she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. Or maybe she was finding it for the first time. She reached Westfield Elementary at 1:38 p.m. The parking lot was filling with parents, minivans and sedans, mothers checking their lipstick in rearview mirrors, fathers loosening ties after lunch breaks. Normal people living normal lives, showing up for their kids. Victoria parked at the far end of the lot. She didn't go inside. She waited. At 1:47, a rusted pickup truck pulled into the lot. It parked in the last available spot, the one farthest from the entrance, between a dumpster and a chain-link fence. Marcus Cole got out. He was wearing a clean button-down shirt, not new, but pressed with the kind of care that suggested an iron and a kitchen table, and a man who wanted to look right for his daughter. His sleeves were rolled down and buttoned at the wrists. His shoes were the same work boots from this morning, wiped clean. He reached into the truck and pulled out a small bouquet of flowers. Grocery store daisies, the kind that cost $4, wrapped in clear cellophane. He held them carefully, like they were worth something. Victoria watched him walk toward the school entrance. He moved slowly, not because he wasn't in a hurry, but because his body hurt. She could see it now, the slight hitch in his left hip, the stiffness in his shoulders, the way he held his torso rigid against the shrapnel that lived inside him. She'd never noticed before. She'd never looked. She got out of the car and followed him inside. Not close, not obviously.
She slipped into the back of the gymnasium, where rows of folding chairs were filling with parents. A paper banner hung across the stage. My Hero, third grade essay presentations. Marcus sat in the second-to-last row, on the end, near the door. He put the flowers on his lap and folded his hands over them. His eyes were already scanning the small stage where a teacher was arranging a microphone stand. Victoria sat in the last row, 3 chairs away from him. He didn't see her. His entire world had narrowed to the stage and the little girl who was about to walk onto it. The presentations began. One by one, children approached the microphone with sheets of paper clutched in small hands. My hero is my mom because she's a nurse. My hero is my grandpa because he was a firefighter. My hero is LeBron James because he's really tall. The parents laughed and clapped and recorded everything on their phones. Normal, warm, a regular Tuesday in America. Then the teacher said, "Next up, Zara Cole." Marcus sat up straighter. His hands tightened around the daisies. Zara walked to the microphone. She was small for 8, thin-boned and serious-faced, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's quiet steadiness. She wore a lavender dress with white shoes, and she held her essay in both hands like it was a treasure map. She adjusted the microphone, cleared her throat, and looked out at the audience. Her eyes found her father in the second-to-last row, and her entire face changed. She smiled, wide, unguarded, the kind of smile that only exists between a child and the person they trust most in the world. Marcus smiled back, and for the first time all day, the weight left his shoulders. My essay is called My Hero, Zara began. Her voice was small but clear. By Zara Cole. A lot of kids wrote about famous people, athletes and presidents and astronauts. But my hero isn't famous. Nobody knows his name, and that's okay, because he told me that real heroes don't need people to know their name. They just need to know they did the right thing. Victoria pressed her hand against her chest. My hero is my dad. His name is Marcus Cole. He's a janitor. He cleans buildings so that other people can do their jobs in a nice place. Some kids at school laughed when I said that. They said janitors aren't heroes. But I think they're wrong. Marcus's jaw worked. His eyes were shining. My dad wakes up every day at 3 in the morning. He makes my lunch and writes me a note. The note always says the same thing. You're my favorite human, Zara Bear. He puts it next to my juice box, so I find it at lunchtime. Sometimes it's the best part of my whole day. A few parents in the audience were already reaching for tissues. My dad works really hard. He has 3 jobs. He cleans buildings, he drives people places, and he carries heavy things in a warehouse. He comes home tired, but he always asks me about my day before he asks about anything else. He says my day matters more than his. Victoria bit down on her lips so hard she tasted copper. My dad has scars on his arms and his back. He doesn't talk about them. He says they're from a long time ago, when he had a different job. I think he was a soldier, but he doesn't say that. He just says he used to help people, and now he helps people in a different way. Marcus blinked, and 2 tears tracked down his face. He didn't wipe them. My mom died when I was 5. Cancer. My dad held my hand every day in the hospital and told me that Mom was the bravest person he ever met. But I think my dad is braver, because Mom got to go to heaven and stop being tired, and Dad had to stay here and keep going. The gymnasium was silent. Every parent, every teacher, every child. Silent. Some people think my dad is nobody.
They yell at him at work. They tell him he's not smart enough or important enough.
I know this because sometimes when he thinks I'm asleep, he sits at the kitchen table and puts his head in his hands and breathes really hard, like he's trying to hold something heavy that nobody else can see. Marcus's whole body was shaking now. He gripped the daisies so tight, the stems bent. But here's what I know that they don't know. My dad is the strongest person in the whole world. Not because he lifts heavy things, or because he used to be a soldier. Because every single morning, no matter how tired he is, no matter how mean people are to him, no matter how much his back hurts, he gets up and he does it all again. For me. Zara looked directly at her father. My teacher said heroes are people who do brave things. I think heroes are people who do hard things when nobody is watching and nobody says thank you. My dad does that every day. He does it for me, and he does it for people who don't even know he's doing it. She took a breath. The paper trembled in her hand. My dad has a tattoo on his arm. It has numbers and stars. I asked him what it means, and he said it's the names of his friends who went away and didn't come back. He said he keeps it so he never forgets his promise. I don't know what the promise is, but I know my dad keeps all his promises. Every single one. Zara folded her paper and looked at the audience. That's why my hero is my dad. Not because he's famous or rich or powerful. Because he's good. And my mom always said that being good is harder than being great. I think she was right. She paused. Thank you. The gymnasium erupted. Not polite applause, the kind that starts in the gut and comes out as something between clapping and crying. Parents stood. Teachers wiped their eyes. Children who'd been squirming in their seats sat perfectly still, because even they understood that something important had just happened. Marcus stood up slowly. He walked to the front of the gymnasium. Zara jumped off the stage and ran into his arms, and he caught her the way he caught everything, solidly, completely, like nothing in the world could make him let go. You came, Daddy, she said into his neck. I'll always come, Zara Bear. Always. He handed her the daisies. She took them like they were roses from a palace garden, burying her nose in the petals and grinning. Daddy, are you crying? Little bit. Because of my essay? Because of you. Because everything I do makes sense when I look at you. Victoria sat in the last row with tears streaming down her face and watched a man worth more than her entire company hold his daughter in a school gymnasium, while parents she'd never meet applauded a janitor who'd saved more lives than anyone in that room would ever know. She understood now. All of it. Why Marcus had stayed at Sentinel. Why he'd taken the insults. Why he'd never revealed himself. Not because he was weak. Because his promise was stronger than his pride. Because Richard Ashford had asked him to watch over his daughter. And Marcus Cole had done exactly that. From the shadows, in a gray uniform, with a mop in his hand, and shrapnel in his spine. Zara pulled back from the hug and looked at the daisies. Daddy, these are the pretty ones from Mr. Kim's store. Only the best for my girl. Daddy? Yeah, baby? The boy who said janitors aren't heroes, I told him something. What'd you tell him? I told him my daddy is braver than his daddy. And he said, prove it. And I said I didn't have to prove it, because my daddy proves it every single day, just by getting out of bed. Marcus pulled her close again. Your mama taught you that. I know. Mama was really smart. The smartest. Zara took his hand, and they walked toward the exit together. The little girl in the lavender dress, and the man in the pressed button-down, with his sleeves covering the scars, and the tattoo, and the 12-year-old promise he'd carried every day without complaint. Victoria waited until they'd left the building. She waited until the parking lot had cleared, and the teacher had taken down the banner, and the janitor at Westfield Elementary, a janitor doing honest work
the same as Marcus, had folded up the chairs and swept the floor. Then she sat alone in the empty gymnasium and called General Harrison. "I found him," she said. And I just watched his 8-year-old daughter tell a room full of strangers that her father is the bravest person in the world. And she doesn't even know the half of it." Harrison was quiet on the other end. "General, I need your help. I need to see every file, every classified document, every patent record, every medical report, everything. I need to know exactly what was taken from Marcus Cole, and I need to know how to give it back." "It's not about giving things back, Miss Ashford. The man doesn't want things. He never has." "Then what does he want?" "He wants his daughter to grow up in a world where people keep their promises. That's all he's ever wanted." Victoria looked at the stage where Zara had stood. The microphone was still there, tilted slightly, catching the light. "Then that's what I'll give him." She drove home, but she didn't go to her penthouse. She went to the Sentinel archives on the 9th floor, the climate-controlled vault where her mother had stored the company's founding documents. She used her master key card, opened the first cabinet, and started reading. It took her 2 hours to find it, buried in a folder labeled Legacy Assets, 2014 Acquisitions. A single receipt. Patent transfer. Ember Sequence Algorithm. Seller. Department of Defense Surplus Division.
Buyer: Eleanor Ashford, Sentinel Defense Corp. Purchase price: $12,000. Attached to the receipt was a note in her mother's handwriting. Promising technology. Original developer. Military. No competing claims. Full commercialization potential. No name. No acknowledgement. No trace of the man who'd written it in a hospital bed, with burned hands and a broken spine. Victoria pulled the next file. Internal memos from Sentinel's engineering team, dating back to 2017. Original Ember sequence architecture contains excessive safety redundancies. Recommends streamlining for cost efficiency. Estimated savings: $14.2 million per production cycle. And then, a response from the anonymous source who'd been filing federal safety complaints for years. The redundancies in the Ember sequence are not excessive. They are designed to ensure that the system prioritizes human life under all conditions, including thermal events exceeding 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Removing them will result in system failure in high-intensity fire scenarios. This is not a cost efficiency issue. This is a human life issue. The complaint was filed from a public library computer 3 blocks from Elmridge Road. Victoria pulled 11 more complaints from the archive, all anonymous, all technically precise, all describing exactly the same problem: Sentinel's engineers cutting safety features to save money, and the original designer fighting to protect people who didn't know they needed protecting. 12 years. Marcus Cole had been fighting for the integrity of his own invention from the shadows. For 12 years. Not for money, not for credit, for the promise he'd made to a dying man in a burning building. Victoria closed the cabinet. She held the patent receipt in her hand and stared at the number. $12,000. That's what her mother had paid for technology now worth billions. That's what the market had decided a hero's promise was worth. She folded the receipt, put it in her pocket, and pulled out her phone. She didn't call her lawyers. She didn't call her board. She didn't call Kevin. She called Mrs. Patterson. "Hello? Mrs. Patterson, this is Victoria Ashford. We spoke earlier today." A pause. "I remember. Is Marcus home?" "Just got back with Zara. They're on the porch. She's showing him something she made at school. A crown out of construction paper. She put it on his head and told him he's the king of janitors." Victoria closed her eyes. "Mrs. Patterson, I'd like to come by tonight. I have something that belongs to Marcus.
something that should have been his a long time ago. What is it? The truth. Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment. Then, "Come after 7. Zara goes to bed at 8, and that man deserves to hear whatever you've got to say without his baby girl watching him fall apart." "I'll be there at 7. Victoria hung up. She sat alone in the archive vault, surrounded by files and folders and the paper trail of a fortune built on a soldier's sacrifice. Above her, on the wall of the main lobby, her father's portrait looked out over the building he'd founded with the same warm, firm eyes that had once looked at the young captain in a burning building and asked him to make a promise. A promise that Marcus Cole had kept every single day since. Victoria reached into her coat and pulled out the photograph Harrison had given her. 6 soldiers standing together, young and alive, one day before everything changed. She held it next to the patent receipt, the picture of what was given, and the receipt for what was taken. She put both in her pocket and stood up. It was 6:42 p.m. She had 18 minutes to figure out how to face the man she'd spent 10 years destroying and 12 hours finally seeing. Victoria pulled up to 2847 Elm Ridge Road at exactly 7 o'clock. She turned off the engine and sat in the silence for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. In her coat pocket, the patent receipt and the photograph pressed against her ribs like evidence at a trial. Which, in a way, they were. The porch light was on. Through the window she could see the glow of a lamp and the faint movement of someone inside. Mrs. Patterson's house next door was dark except for the kitchen, where Victoria could make out the older woman's silhouette watching from behind a curtain. Victoria got out of the car. She walked up the cracked concrete path, past the pink bicycle with the streamers, past a pair of small rain boots sitting neatly by the door, past a welcome mat so worn the letters had faded to ghosts. She knocked. Footsteps. The door opened and Marcus Cole stood in front of her in a plain white t-shirt and worn jeans, a dish towel over his shoulder. Without the uniform, without the corporate context, he looked different. Not smaller, larger somehow. Like the building had been shrinking him, and now, in his own home, he could finally fill his actual shape. His face showed nothing when he saw her. No surprise, no anger, no satisfaction. Just the steady, unreadable calm of a man who had trained himself to survive anything by expecting everything. "Ms. Ashford." "Marcus." It was the first time she'd ever used his first name. They both noticed. "Zara just went to bed," he said. "She brushed her teeth twice because she said today was a two-brushing kind of day." Victoria almost smiled. Almost. "Can I come in?" Marcus studied her for a moment. The red eyes, the smeared mascara, the coat that cost more than his truck. Then he stepped aside and held the door open. The house was small and immaculate, not decorated, maintained. There's a difference. Every surface was clean. Every object had a place. Military precision applied to civilian poverty. A couch with a blanket folded over the arm. A kitchen table with 2 chairs. A shelf with books, technical manuals, children's stories, a Bible with a cracked spine. On the mantel, above a small gas fireplace, 3 framed photographs. Denise, smiling in a hospital gown, holding a newborn Zara. Marcus, in military dress uniform, young and unburned. And in the center, a photo Victoria recognized instantly. Her father, Colonel Richard Ashford, standing with his arm around a younger Marcus, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Victoria stopped in front of that photo. Her father looked happy. Not the composed, official happiness of his corporate portrait. Real happiness. The kind that comes from standing next to someone you trust with your life. "He had a good laugh," Marcus said from behind her. big and loud. He used to embarrass the hell out of the junior officers. "I remember," Victoria whispered. "He used to laugh like that at home, before he got sick." "He got sick?" "Lung damage, from the fire."
The doctor said the smoke inhalation caused progressive pulmonary fibrosis. He never told anyone at work. He just got quieter, slower, and then one morning he didn't wake up. Marcus was very still. "I didn't know that. The fire, that was because of Ember Fall?" The doctors couldn't say for certain, but the timeline matched. Marcus sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. He pressed his palms flat on the table, the same way Victoria had pressed hers on the conference table that morning, steadying himself against something that wanted to knock him over. "I carried him out," Marcus said quietly. "I thought I saved him." "You did save him. You gave him 6 more years. 6 years he wouldn't have had." Victoria sat down across from him. "He saw me graduate. He walked me down the aisle. He held my nephew the day he was born. He was there when I took over Sentinel. 6 years, Marcus. You gave us 6 years." Marcus looked at his hands on the table. Scarred. Rough. The hands of a man who'd rebuilt his life, one mop stroke at a time. It wasn't enough. It was everything. They sat in silence. The refrigerator hummed. Down the hall, Zara's nightlight cast a faint purple glow through her cracked bedroom door. Victoria reached into her coat and pulled out the patent receipt. She unfolded it and placed it on the table between them. Marcus looked at it. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. A door opening to a room he'd locked a long time ago. "You found it," he said. $12,000. My mother bought your life's work for $12,000. She didn't know it was mine. The auction was anonymous. Military surplus. No names attached. Does that matter? Marcus considered this. It mattered to me. For a while. When I first found out, I was angry. Really angry. The kind of angry that makes you want to burn things down. But then I thought about your father, about the promise, and I realized that burning Sentinel down wouldn't bring my team back. It wouldn't heal my spine. It wouldn't make my daughter's life better. So I applied for the janitor job instead. To watch over us. To watch over the code. To make sure nobody died because someone cut a corner to save $1. Your father didn't ask me to protect his company. He asked me to protect people. If that meant mopping floors in the same building where my stolen work was making other people rich, then that's what it meant. Victoria pulled out the second item, the photograph of Shadow 7. She laid it next to the receipt. "Tell me about them," she said. Marcus looked at the photograph for a long time. His thumb moved across the faces the same way it moved across the stars on his tattoo. Darnell Price, best mechanic I ever met. Could fix anything with a paperclip and a prayer. He had a 2-year-old son he'd never held, because he deployed before the baby was born. He was supposed to rotate home 3 days after the mission. Marcus's voice was steady. The steadiness of a man who'd said these names so many times, they'd become part of his breathing. Michael Torres, medic. Funniest guy in the unit. Used to do impressions of the officers that would make you cry laughing. His wife was pregnant with twins. He found out the morning of the mission. He showed us the ultrasound picture and said he was naming them Thunder and Lightning. Did she? His wife? She named them Miguel and Maria. I send them birthday cards every year. They're 12 now. Maria wants to be a doctor like her dad. Victoria pressed her hand over her mouth. Jimmy Okafor, 24 years old, youngest in the unit, from Baltimore. Grew up in foster care, joined the Army because it was the first place that felt like family. He called me Big Brother. He was the first one through the door that night.
He said, "If we're going to die, let's die moving forward."
He made it 30 feet into the building before the ceiling came down. Marcus paused. His jaw worked. He kept going. William Chen, communications specialist. Quietest man I ever served with. Spoke 4 languages, but preferred silence. He had a garden at the base. Grew tomatoes in ammunition cans. His parents came from Shanghai with nothing. He was the first person in his family born in America. His mother still writes to me, every Christmas. She sends me a photo of his garden. She kept it going. 12 years of tomatoes. Victoria was crying silently, tears dropping onto the table between the receipt and the photograph. Angela Reeves, only woman in the unit. Toughest soldier I ever met, and I mean that literally. She outran every man on the team, outshot most of us, and had a laugh that could shake walls. Her husband was a teacher in Tallahassee. 3rd grade. He still teaches. I talked to him last month. He said he tells his students about Angela every Veterans Day. He says she's still the bravest person he ever knew. Marcus touched each face in the photograph one more time. They went in knowing the odds. They went in because your father was trapped and the official rescue was called off. They went in because that's what Shadow 7 did. We went where nobody else would go. And you were the only one who came out. I was the only one who walked out. They all came out. I carried Jimmy. Torres was carried by the secondary team. Darnell and Chen and Angela were recovered 3 days later. He stopped. They came home, just not the way we planned. Victoria looked at the photograph, at the faces of 5 people who died so her father could live, and felt the full weight of what she'd built her life on top of. Marcus, I have to tell you something, and I need you to hear me. I'm listening. I spent today going through the company archives, the patent acquisition, the engineering memos, the safety complaints. Yours. I read all of them. Every anonymous report, every warning you filed, every attempt you made to protect the integrity of your own invention from inside the building where it was stolen from you. Marcus said nothing. You've been fighting for 12 years, not for money, not for recognition, for the promise, for the people who'd die if the system failed. Victoria's voice broke. And I've been standing in your way, cutting corners, overriding safety protocols, pushing profits over everything you built the code to protect. You didn't know. I should have known. I should have looked. I should have asked one single question about where our core technology came from instead of just accepting it as mine. She pulled the receipt toward her. $12,000. That's what my family paid for your sacrifice. And then I paid you $9.50 an hour to clean up after us. Marcus looked at the receipt, then at Victoria. What do you want me to say? I don't want you to say anything. I want you to listen. Victoria reached into her coat one more time and pulled out a document. A legal form she'd had her attorney's draft in the 3 hours between leaving the archive and driving here. This is a full patent reversion. Effective immediately, the Ember sequence algorithm and all derivative technologies revert to their original creator, you. Full ownership, full royalties, retroactive compensation for all revenue generated since 2014. Marcus stared at the document. He didn't touch it. The estimated value of retroactive royalties is somewhere north of $400 million. The number hung in the small kitchen like something from another planet. $400 million, sitting on a table next to a salt shaker and a paper napkin holder and a child's homework folder with a glitter sticker on the front. Marcus shook his head slowly. I don't want it. Marcus, I said I don't want it. I didn't write that code for money. I wrote it for Darnell and Michael and Jimmy and William and Angela. I wrote it for your father. I wrote it because people were dying in fires that could be prevented, and I made a promise that I'd stop it. Then don't take the money for yourself. Take it for Zara. Take it for the families. Take it for whoever you want. But the patent is yours, Marcus. It was always yours. And I'm not leaving this table until you take back what belongs to you. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Down the hall, Zara murmured in her sleep. Something about daisies. And both adults held their breath until she settled. There's something else, Marcus said finally. He stood up, walked to a drawer in the kitchen, and pulled out a worn envelope. He held it for a moment, weighing it in his hand like he'd weighed it 1,000 times before. Your father gave me this the night before Emberfall. He said if he didn't make it home, I should give it to his daughter when she was ready. Marcus set the envelope on the table. I've been carrying it for 12 years, waiting for the right moment. I thought I'd know when it came. I think this is it. Victoria picked up the envelope. Her father's handwriting on the front. Firm, slanted, unmistakable. One word. Victoria. She opened it with trembling fingers and unfolded a single sheet of paper. She read it silently. Her lips moved with the words. Her hands shook harder with each line. When she finished, she pressed the letter against her chest and closed her eyes, and the sound that came out of her was not crying. It was something older than that. Something that comes from the place where daughters keep the voice of their fathers after the voice itself is gone. Read it to me, Marcus said quietly. I never opened it. It wasn't mine to read. Victoria wiped her face. She unfolded the letter and read aloud, her voice breaking on almost every word. My dearest Victoria, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. But it also means Marcus kept his word, and that doesn't surprise me one bit. The man giving you this letter is the finest soldier and the finest human being I have ever known. Not because he's fearless. He's terrified every single day. But he does the right thing anyway, and that's the only definition of courage that matters. Victoria paused, breathed, continued. When you're old enough to run companies and change the world, remember this. The person who cleans your floors might be the most important person in your building. The person who serves without recognition might be carrying a weight you can't imagine. Honor them. Protect them. Because they are protecting you, even when you don't know it. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I love you more than any mission, any medal, any legacy I could leave behind. Be powerful, sweetheart. But remember that real power isn't about what you control. It's about who you protect. Your loving father, Colonel Richard Ashford. The kitchen was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a child breathing in her sleep. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He was the best man I ever knew. He trusted you with everything, Victoria said. His life, his daughter, his legacy. And I let you down. I should have told you sooner. I should have found a way. You kept your promise, every single day for 12 years. You didn't let anyone down, Marcus. You let everyone up. She pushed the patent document toward him again. Take it. Not for the money, for the mission. You wrote the code to save lives. If you own the patent, you control the safety standards. No one can cut corners. No one can override the protocols. You can make sure the system does what you designed it to do. Marcus looked at the document, then at the photograph of Shadow 7, then at the purple glow coming from Zara's room. One condition, he said. Name it. The company keeps running, but we do it right. Every system tested to full spec. No profits over people. No exceptions. And the 5 families, Darnells, Michaels, Jimmys, Angelas, Williams, they get full scholarships for their children. Every one of them. Through college, through grad school, through whatever they need. Done. And one more thing. Anything. I keep the janitor uniform. Victoria almost laughed. Almost. Why? Because the day I stop being willing to clean up messes is the day I stop understanding why any of this matters. Your father taught me that. The most important conversations happen with people who feel comfortable talking to the man with the mop. I lose the uniform, I lose that. And I've already lost enough. Victoria nodded. She extended her hand across the table. Marcus looked at it. The manicured fingers, the expensive watch, the hand that had thrown his notebook onto a wet table 12 hours ago. He took it. His grip was firm and rough and warm, and Victoria felt the scars on his palm press against her skin, and she understood that she was touching the hand that had pulled her father from a fire, that had written the code that saved thousands of lives, that had mopped her floors without complaint for a decade, and that had held a little girl's hand every single day since her mother died. "I'm sorry," Victoria said, "for everything." "I know. It's not enough." "It's a start." Marcus held her hand for one more moment, then let go. He picked up the patent document, folded it carefully, and placed it inside the same drawer where he'd kept her father's letter for 12 years. Victoria stood up. She put on her coat, touched the photograph of Shadow 7 one last time, and walked to the door. "Ms. Ashford." She turned. Marcus was standing in his kitchen, dish towel over his shoulder, the light from Zara's room casting purple shadows across the floor. "Your father was right about you. You are going to change the world." "He said that?" "The night before the mission. He said his daughter was going to be something extraordinary. He just wanted to make sure somebody was around to remind her what extraordinary actually means." Victoria nodded. She couldn't speak. She stepped onto the porch, and the door closed softly behind her. She sat in her car for 10 minutes before she could drive. 3 months later, Sentinel Defense Corporation held a press conference that made national news. Victoria Ashford stood at the podium and told the truth. All of it. The stolen patent, the anonymous safety reports, the man who'd mopped her floors while protecting her company from itself. Marcus stood beside her in his gray uniform. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. General Harrison, seated in the front row in full dress uniform, stood and saluted. Then every veteran in the room. Then the civilians. The applause lasted 4 full minutes. The company was restructured and renamed Cole and Ashford Safety Systems. Marcus took the position of Chief Safety Officer with full authority over every project and every protocol. He wore the gray uniform to work every day. He arrived at 4:47 a.m. He mopped the lobby floor himself before anyone else arrived. The Ember sequence was restored to its original architecture. Every safety redundancy Marcus had built was reinstated. The system passed military testing at 1800 degrees without a single failure. The Pentagon contract was signed, not for $2.3 billion, but for $3.1 billion, because the restored system exceeded every specification. 5 full scholarships were established. The Shadow 7 Memorial Fund. Darnell Price Jr. enrolled in engineering school. Maria Torres started pre-med. The others were still young, but the money was waiting. And every month, without fail, Marcus Cole sent flowers to 5 families in 5 cities. He never missed. Not once in 13 years. One evening, a year after everything changed, Marcus walked through the new lobby of Cole and Ashford Safety Systems with Zara beside him. She was 9 now, taller, still serious-faced, still holding his hand. Above them, a framed photograph hung on the wall. 6 soldiers standing together, young and alive, one day before the fire.
Below the photograph, an inscription. Built by those who serve, dedicated to those who didn't come home. Zara looked up at the photo. She knew the names now. Marcus had told her everything. Not all at once, but slowly, over months of bedtime conversations, piece by piece, until she understood what her father had done, and why, and for whom.
Daddy?
Yeah, baby?
Do you still clean the floors?
Every morning. First one in.
Even though you're the boss?
Especially because I'm the boss. Zara thought about this.
Because the most important work is the work nobody sees?
Marcus smiled. Who taught you that?
You did. Like 100 times.
He laughed, big and loud. The kind of laugh that Richard Ashford used to have. The kind that filled a room and made everyone in it feel like things were going to be all right. They walked through the lobby, past the photograph, past the inscription, past the security desk, where the guard nodded and said, "Evening, Captain." Past the conference room, where Marcus had once knelt on the floor cleaning coffee stains while a billionaire laughed at him. Past the window where, on clear days, you could see all the way to the edge of the city. Zara stopped at the front door and looked back. The building rose behind them, glass and steel and light, bearing a name that had been earned in fire and kept in silence for 12 years.
Daddy?
Yeah?
Your tattoo. The stars. You said 5 of them are empty because those friends went away.
That's right.
And the one filled-in star is you. Because you stayed.
That's right. Zara squeezed his hand.
I'm glad you stayed.
Marcus Cole looked down at his daughter, Denise's eyes, his stubbornness, and a heart big enough to forgive a world that hadn't earned it. And he felt the weight of 12 years lift off his shoulders. Not all at once. Not completely. Some weights you carry forever, and that's all right. Because the carrying is the point. The carrying is the promise. Me too, Zara Bear. Me too. They walked out into the evening light, the man in the gray uniform and the girl in the lavender dress, leaving behind a building full of technology designed to save lives, and walking toward a small house with a crooked porch swing, where a plate of leftover spaghetti and a homework folder with a glitter sticker were waiting on the kitchen table. Behind them, the sun caught the glass face of the building and lit it up like fire. But the good kind. The kind that doesn't destroy. The kind that burns away everything false and leaves only what's real.
And on Marcus Cole's wrist, faded but permanent, the tattoo held its ground. S7-Fire-0926. 6 stars, 5 empty, 1 filled. A map of loss and survival, and a promise kept so faithfully that it had become something more than memory. It had become proof that some people don't need titles or recognition or $400 million to prove their worth. Their honor lives in every small task done with integrity, every floor mopped in silence, every promise kept when the world isn't watching. Because when you choose to do what's right, quietly, stubbornly, every single day, the world doesn't just notice eventually. It stands up and salutes.